You spend hours crafting the perfect post, choosing the right words, the perfect image, agonizing over every detail because you know people are watching, judging, forming opinions about you. You hit publish and then you wait, refreshing constantly, watching the reactions trickle in, or worse, not trickle in at all. Your heart races a little faster with each minute that passes without validation. And here is the uncomfortable truth nobody wants to hear. They are not thinking about you, not really. Not the way you think they are. While you are lying awake at 3 in the morning replaying that awkward thing you said at work, the person you said it to has already forgotten it happened. They are thinking about their own embarrassing moment, their own fears, their own problems. Your mind has convinced you that you are the center of everyone else's universe, but you are not even a footnote in most people's thoughts. This is not cruelty, this is liberation. And the moment you truly understand this, everything changes. Henry Ford revolutionized industry with one simple principle: eliminate waste. Every movement, every process, every second had to serve a purpose, or it was cut from the system. Your mind is a factory that runs 24 hours a day, and right now it is producing mountains of waste. Thoughts about what other people think of you, anxiety about their opinions, energy spent crafting a version of yourself for their approval. This is not just inefficient, it is the single biggest drain on your mental resources. Ford understood that you cannot build anything great when your production line is clogged with unnecessary processes. Your mental assembly line is currently spending 80% of its energy on a product nobody ordered, other people's opinions. The Stoics discovered this 2,000 years before Ford built his first car. Epictetus wrote that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the ancient world, reminded himself daily that the opinions of others are nothing but smoke and dust. These were not men hiding from the world. They were men who understood that freedom comes from one brutal realization. The world does not care about you nearly as much as you think it does, and that is the best news you will ever receive. Let me show you exactly how your brain is sabotaging you right now. There is a cognitive bias called the spotlight effect, and it is running in the background of your mind every single day. Your brain genuinely believes that other people are paying far more attention to you than they actually are. Researchers have proven this again and again. In one study, participants wore embarrassing t-shirts into a room full of strangers. They estimated that about 50% of people noticed their shirt. The actual number was less than 25%. Your brain is doubling the amount of attention you think you are receiving. This is not a small miscalculation. This is your mental factory producing defective products based on completely inaccurate data. And here is where it gets worse. Even when people do notice you, they forget almost immediately. The human brain has to process 11 million bits of information every second, but can only consciously handle about 40. That awkward thing you said, that mistake you made, that moment you replay endlessly in your mind, it did not even make it into their conscious processing. It was filtered out as noise within seconds. You are torturing yourself over data that was deleted from their system before they even left the room. The neuroscience behind this is fascinating and brutal. Your brain has something called the default mode network, a series of brain regions that activate when you are not focused on external tasks. And what does this network do when it turns on? It thinks about you, your past, your future, your social standing, how others perceive you. This is your brain's factory in idle mode, and instead of shutting down to conserve energy, it is running the most wasteful production line imaginable. Endless simulations of social scenarios that will never happen. The amygdala, your brain's threat detection system, flags social rejection as a survival threat equivalent to physical danger. Your ancestors needed this because being rejected from the tribe meant death. But you are not living in a tribe anymore. You are living in a world where the opinion of a stranger on the internet triggers the same neural response as being chased by a predator. Your hardware has not updated, but your software environment has completely changed. You are running ancient survival code in a modern context where it no longer applies, and it is destroying your peace of mind. Here is what makes this even more insidious. The dopamine system in your brain has been hijacked. Every time you check for validation, every time you refresh that page, Every time you look for a reaction, you are triggering a small dopamine release. Not because you got the validation, but because of the anticipation of potentially getting it. You are not addicted to approval, you are addicted to checking for approval. The behavior itself has become the reward. Social media companies understand this better than you understand yourself. They have built their entire business model around exploiting this neural vulnerability. Variable ratio reinforcement schedule, the most addictive pattern known to psychology. Sometimes you get the validation, sometimes you do not, and that uncertainty keeps you coming back far more powerfully than if you got it every single time. You are not weak for falling into this trap, you are human. But you are spending your finite mental energy on an infinite loop that produces nothing of value. Now let me tell you what the Stoics understood that modern psychology is only now confirming. The opinion of others is completely outside your control. Completely. You can do everything right, be kind, be competent, be generous, and someone will still dislike you. You can do everything wrong, and someone will still praise you. The dichotomy of control, the foundational principle of Stoic philosophy, draws a sharp line. Things within your control and things outside your control. Other people's thoughts fall entirely outside that line. Marcus Aurelius ruled the Roman Empire, commanded armies, made decisions that affected millions of lives. And in his private journals, the ones he never intended anyone to read, he wrote, "It never ceases to amaze me. We all love ourselves more than other people, but care more about their opinion than our own." The most powerful man in the world, struggling with the same mental trap you are struggling with right now. But he found the solution, and it is the same solution available to you. The solution is not positive thinking. It is not affirmations. It is not pretending you do not care when you do. The solution is rebuilding your factory from the ground up with a different production goal. Henry Ford did not make cars faster by telling workers to try harder. He redesigned the entire system. You cannot overcome the need for external validation by willpower alone. You need to redesign your mental processes. First protocol, redirect the production line. Every time you catch yourself thinking about what someone else thinks of you, treat it as a quality control failure. Stop the line. Ask yourself, is this thought producing anything useful? Is worrying about their opinion changing their opinion? Is rehearsing what you should have said going to change what you actually said? The answer is always no. You are producing waste. Shut down that line immediately. Second protocol, run the numbers. Ford was obsessed with metrics because you cannot improve what you do not measure. Start measuring how much time you actually spend thinking about other people versus how much time they spend thinking about you. Write it down. Track it. You will see the disparity immediately. You spent 2 hours yesterday worrying about what your boss thought about your presentation. How many minutes did your boss actually spend thinking about your presentation after the meeting ended? Probably less than 5. You spent 3 days upset about a comment someone made. How long did they think about that comment after they said it? Probably not at all. You are investing massive amounts of mental capital into something with zero return. This is not just inefficient, this is insane. Third protocol, accept the fundamental asymmetry of human attention. This is where amor fati comes in. The Stoic practice of loving your fate, of not just accepting reality, but embracing it. The reality is this. You are the main character in your life, but you are a background extra in everyone else's. This is not sad, this is mathematical. There are 8 billion people on this planet. Your consciousness can only exist in one of them. Everyone else is living their own internal movie where they are the protagonist, and you barely have a speaking role. The sooner you accept this, the sooner you stop wasting energy trying to rewrite a script you have no control over. Epictetus taught his students to practice voluntary discomfort to build resilience. Modern psychology calls this exposure therapy. The principle is the same. The only way to stop fearing something is to face it repeatedly until your brain recalibrates. You fear social judgment? Deliberately put yourself in situations where you will be judged and watch nothing happen. Wear that ridiculous shirt. Say that unpopular opinion. Make that mistake in public, and then observe. The world keeps spinning. People move on. Life continues. Your brain predicted catastrophe. Reality delivered indifference. Do this enough times and your neural pathways literally change. The amygdala stops flagging social judgment as a threat because it has learned through repeated exposure that it is not. Fourth protocol: build production systems that do not require external inputs. Ford's genius was not making individual workers more motivated. It was building a system so efficient that individual variation did not matter. You need to build mental systems that produce value regardless of external validation. Create things because creating is valuable, not because the response is valuable. Write that article even if nobody reads it. Start that project even if nobody cares. Develop that skill even if nobody applauds. The value is in the production itself, not in the reception. This is not easy. This goes against every social instinct you have. But this is the only path to genuine freedom. When your sense of worth is tied to your own standards rather than others' opinions, you become unshakable. Not because you are confident, but because you are independent. Let me give you a real-world application of this. There was a ceramic teacher who divided his class into two groups. Group A would be graded on quantity. Produce as many pots as possible. Weight determines grade. Group B would be graded on quality. Produce one perfect pot. At the end of the semester, the highest quality pots all came from the quantity group. Why? Because they were not paralyzed by the need for perfection. They were not spending mental energy worrying about judgment. They were just producing, learning, iterating, improving through volume rather than through anxiety. The quality group spent the entire semester planning, theorizing, worrying about getting it right, and produced mediocre work. This is your life right now. You are in the quality group, paralyzed by the fear of judgment, producing nothing of real value because you are too busy managing everyone's perception of your production. Switch groups. Start producing. Stop curating. The ultimate Stoic insight is this: freedom is not the absence of constraints. It is the acceptance of what is actually within your power to change. You cannot control what people think about you, but you can control how much mental energy you allocate to that uncontrollable variable. Premeditatio malorum, the Stoic practice of negative visualization, is not pessimism, it is preparation. Imagine the worst-case scenario. Everyone judges you harshly. Everyone thinks poorly of you. Everyone criticizes your work. Sit with that. Really feel it, and then ask, what actually happens to you in that scenario? Do you die? Do you lose your capacity to think, to create, to grow? Or do you just feel uncomfortable for a while and then keep living? The answer is obvious, but your brain has been hiding it from you behind layers of catastrophic thinking. When you practice visualizing the worst outcome and realizing you survive it, the fear loses its power. The opinion of others becomes what it actually is: noise. Data you can consider or ignore based on whether it serves your goals. Here is where this gets practical. You cannot just stop caring what people think through sheer will. That is like trying to stop breathing through determination. You need replacement behaviors, new production lines to run when the old ones shut down. Every time you catch yourself seeking validation, redirect to creation. Check for likes? Write a paragraph instead. Worry about what they thought? Work on your project instead. Replay that social interaction. Practice a skill instead. This is not distraction, this is rewiring. You are building new neural pathways that bypass the validation loop entirely. Over time, probably 6 to 8 weeks of consistent practice, your brain will default to the new pattern. The dopamine hit from creating will replace the dopamine hit from checking. You are not fighting your brain's reward system, you are redirecting it toward productive outputs. Marcus Aurelius had a daily practice that has survived 2,000 years because it works. Every morning he would remind himself, when you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. This was not pessimism. This was preparation. He was immunizing himself against disappointment by accepting human nature in advance. You can do the same thing. Before you post, before you speak, before you create anything public, remind yourself. Some people will misunderstand this, some will criticize it, some will ignore it, and that is completely normal and outside my control. What is inside my control is whether I create it at all. This single mental shift, this acceptance in advance, eliminates 90% of the anxiety you experience around social judgment. The neuroscience supports this completely. When you accept an outcome in advance, when you mentally prepare for all possibilities, including the negative ones, your amygdala shows decreased activation. Your brain stops treating uncertainty as threat. You are not being negative, you are being realistic, and your nervous system knows the difference. The anticipation of judgment is often worse than the judgment itself, because your brain is terrible at predicting social outcomes. It always assumes the worst. It always overestimates negative reactions. It always catastrophizes. By pre-accepting all possible outcomes, you are removing the element your brain fears most: surprise. You are running a mental simulation that shows you surviving every scenario, and your threat detection system recalibrates accordingly. Now let me address the elephant in the room. You might be thinking, but I need feedback. I need to know how I am doing. I need other people's perspectives to improve. This is true. But there is a massive difference between seeking useful feedback and seeking validation. Useful feedback is specific, actionable, and comes from people whose expertise you respect. Validation is general, emotional, and comes from whoever happens to be watching. One improves your work, the other feeds your anxiety. Ford did not ask random people on the street what they thought about his manufacturing process. He consulted engineers and tested results. You should do the same. Identify 3 to 5 people whose judgment you actually value in specific domains. Those are your quality control advisors. Everyone else's opinion is market noise. You acknowledge it exists. You do not let it drive your decisions. This brings us to the final piece: building anti-fragile self-worth. Nassim Taleb's concept of anti-fragility describes systems that actually get stronger from stress and disorder. Your current system is fragile. Criticism breaks it, indifference wounds it, rejection destroys it. You need to build a system that uses all of those inputs as fuel. How? By grounding your identity in process rather than results, in effort rather than outcome, in production rather than reception. When someone criticizes your work, that is free market research. When someone ignores your creation, that is data about audience fit. When someone rejects your idea, that is information about timing or presentation. None of it means anything about your worth as a person, because your worth is not determined by external metrics. Your worth is determined by whether you are running your factory efficiently, whether you are producing according to your own standards, whether you are improving your systems over time. The Stoics called this the inner citadel, the fortress of self that external events cannot breach. Modern psychology calls it internal locus of control. Ford would have called it vertical integration, controlling your entire supply chain from raw material to finished product. The language changes, but the principle remains the same. When your sense of self is internally generated rather than externally validated, you become truly free. Not free from judgment. Judgment will always exist, but free from the need for judgment to determine your worth. This is the difference between independence and isolation. Isolation is avoiding the world because you cannot handle its opinions. Independence is engaging with the world while remaining unshaken by its opinions. One is fear, the other is strength. Let me give you a 30-day protocol to build this independence systematically. Week 1. Awareness. Every time you catch yourself thinking about what someone else thinks, make a mental note or write it down. Do not judge it. Do not try to stop it. Just observe. You are running diagnostics on your current factory operation. By the end of week 1, you will see exactly how much of your mental production is dedicated to this wasteful process. Week 2, interruption. Now that you are aware of the pattern, start interrupting it. When you catch the thought, say to yourself, "That is outside my control," and immediately redirect to something within your control. What can I create right now? What can I learn right now? What action can I take right now? This is active rewiring. Week 3, exposure. Deliberately do small things that invite judgment. Speak up in that meeting. Post that opinion. Try that new thing. Start building evidence that judgment is not dangerous. Your brain needs proof that its threat detection is miscalibrated. Week 4, reflection and reinforcement. Look back at the previous 3 weeks. What did you create when you stopped seeking validation? What did you learn when you stopped fearing judgment? Write it down. Your brain responds to evidence. Give it evidence that this new system works better than the old one. Here is what nobody tells you about freedom. It is not comfortable at first. When you stop seeking external validation, there is a withdrawal period. Your dopamine system protests. Your social instincts rebel. Your brain keeps trying to run the old programs. This is normal. This is expected. This is part of the process. Ford's factories did not run smoothly on day 1. They required constant adjustment, troubleshooting, optimization. Your mental factory is no different. The difference is that Ford had a clear goal. Efficient car production. You need an equally clear goal. Efficient mental production. And efficient mental production means eliminating waste, which means stopping the endless cycle of seeking, checking, and worrying about opinions that do not matter. The ultimate paradox is this. When you stop caring what everyone thinks, the people who matter start paying more attention. Why? Because authenticity is rare, confidence is magnetic, and someone who is genuinely unbothered by social judgment stands out in a world full of people performing for approval. You become interesting not because you are trying to be interesting, but because you have stopped trying to be anything other than what you actually are. This is not a strategy to gain approval. If you are doing it for that reason, you have missed the point entirely. This is about internal freedom, about reclaiming the mental energy you are currently hemorrhaging on uncontrollable variables and redirecting it toward actually building something meaningful. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." That is not philosophy. That is engineering. That is systems design. That is the same principle Ford applied to manufacturing. Control what you can control, optimize those processes, and stop wasting resources on what you cannot control. The world does not care about you the way you think it does. Some people will love you, some will hate you. Most will be indifferent, and none of it has anything to do with your actual worth. Your worth is what you produce, how you grow, what you build, who you become through your own efforts according to your own standards. Everything else is commentary, and commentary does not run the factory. If you have made it this far, I already know something important about you. You are not looking for easy answers or quick fixes. You are looking for systems that actually work, for truth that cuts through the noise, for frameworks that stand up to real-life application. This is exactly the kind of content we create every week on this channel. Not motivation that fades by tomorrow, but mental engineering that compounds over time. Real philosophy applied to real problems with real solutions backed by both ancient wisdom and modern science. If that resonates with you, subscribe to this channel. Not because I am asking you to, but because you deserve a space where you can learn to build the kind of mental strength that does not depend on anyone's approval, including mine. Every video is another tool in your factory, another system to implement, another upgrade to your mental production line. The next one is already ready, and it is going to show you exactly how to turn your biggest weakness into your greatest strength.